Good evening, everyone. So we are here for the session of our biological series. Today's topic is on anatomy and physiology of respiratory system by our speaker, Ms. Srija Koripela. Presently, she is a final year medical student from GSL Medical College, Andhra Pradesh. Her passion is in research and aspiring to be a physician scientist. Along with Ms. Srija, we have a very special guest as a commentator for today's presentation, Dr. Anurag Agarwal. Dr. Agarwal is a director of the CSIR Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology. After completing graduate medical education at the AIIMS Delhi, he further trained in internal medicine, pulmonary disease, and critical care at Baylor College of Medicine, USA, followed by a PhD in physiology from Delhi University. His primary research is in respiratory biology, and broader interests are in smart deployment of emerging technologies towards healthcare, where he serves on national think tanks, co-chairs the Lancet and Financial Times Commission on Governing Health Futures, and serves on related expert groups at World Health Organization and Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence. He received the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize, the highest government scientific award of India in 2014. He is an elected fellow of the Indian National Science Academy and the Indian Academy of Science. So with this introduction, I'm pleased to begin our session and request Dr. Agrawal to begin our session.
Thank you so much. And I would like to start off by congratulating all of you for developing such an interesting and important format to disseminate knowledge. From my background, you can see I may have a bias for the lungs, and I will confess to the bias immediately. But I always think that these are fascinating organs. People sometimes ask what is the biggest organ of the body, and I always want to say by what standards. If you were to look at surface, you could spread the lungs out over an entire football field. If you think about breathing, you take about a 500 ml breath 12 times in a minute. That's that's a lot. If you think about the total amount of air you breathe in a day, that's almost 10,000 liters after accounting for slight increase in breathing when you walk around. So you have to develop an organ, both anatomically and physiologically, capable of exchanging gas across the size of a football field, capable of moving 10,000 liters of air in and out without even thinking about it. So what my young colleague Srija will do here today, she's in the final year of medical school, will talk to you about how the anatomy and the physiology of the lung make this almost unimaginable machine possible. So with that, over to you, Srija. You're on mute, Srija.
Thank you, sir.
We can see your slides. It's not in a show mode yet, but we can see. Yeah, now it's great, fantastic.
Good evening, everyone. I am Srija, a final year medical student from Andhra Pradesh. Currently, the respiratory system is something which has gained a lot of importance, even from the point of view of a common man. So let's dive into its mechanics and architecture. The respiratory system, like any other biological system, consists of specific organs and structures that are responsible for gas exchange in order to continue life. It is divided into two parts, the upper respiratory system and the lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract consists of the nasal cavity, the pharynx, and the larynx. The lower respiratory tract consists of the trachea, the primary bronchi and the bronchioles, along with the lungs. The nose serves as the main route of external air entry and also the external opening of the respiratory system. It is divided into two cavities by means of a septum. The medial wall of the nose is thus formed by the nasal septum. The lateral wall is formed by the three bony turbinates, the superior turbinate, the medial turbinate, and the inferior turbinate, which receive the opening of the paranasal sinuses. The roof is formed by the three bony structures, the frontal, ethmoid, and sphenoid bones. And the floor is formed by the horizontal plate of the palatine bone and the palatine process of the maxilla. The functions of the nose include warming and humidification of the air entering through the nose. As the air travels over the moist mucosa, it becomes saturated with the water vapor. The entrance of the nasal cavity contains many tiny hairs which are surrounded with mucosa. This mucosa coated hair, they trap the foreign body or the dust that is entering along with the inspired air, thereby filtering and cleaning it. Nose also serves the functions of olfaction and acts as a resonating chamber for speech. There are 4 air-filled spaces inside the bones around the nose, which are called as the paranasal sinuses. They are the frontal sinus, the maxillary sinus, and the deep-seated ethmoid and sphenoidal sinuses. These sinuses aid in the circulation of air so that it gets warm and moist, and also they amplify the sound and voice. So this is the reason why we sound totally different when we plug our nose or when our nose gets clogged with mucus, especially during cold. Pharynx is a muscular passage just behind the mouth and the nasal cavity, extending from the base of the skull to the larynx or the 6th cervical vertebra. It is again divided into 3 parts, namely the nasopharynx, which is just behind the nasal cavity, the oropharynx connecting the cavity, and the laryngopharynx just behind the larynx. This oropharynx and the laryngopharynx, they serve as a common passage for both the air entering through the nasal cavity and the food through the oral cavity. The functions of the pharynx are that it acts as a passageway for air and food. It helps in warming and humidifying the air, also helps in taste and hearing. It serves a function of protection as it consists of lymphatic tissue called the pharyngeal tonsils, which specifically produce antibodies. It also aids in the process of speech by acting as a resonating chamber. The voice box or the larynx extends from the root of the tongue. It lies just in front of the laryngopharynx at the level of the 3rd to 6th cervical vertebra. This larynx grows slightly larger in the males. The larynx is composed of several paid and unpaid irregularly shaped cartilages attached to each other by means of various ligaments and membranes. The 3 unpaid cartilages are the thyroid, on which the thyroid gland sits, the cricoid, and the epiglottis, which is leaf-shaped. The 3 paid cartilages are the arytenoids, cuneiform, and the corniculate. The thyroid cartilage is the most prominent and consists of 2 flat pieces which are fused to form the Adam's apple, which is again more prominent in the males. The epiglottis is a leaf-shaped cartilage that is attached to the thyroid cartilage, which just closes the windpipe whenever we swallow, so that the food goes into the esophagus, not into the trachea. The opening of the vocal cords is called as the glottis, and these vocal cords vibrate with the expelled air so as to create sound, that is to produce a voice. The functions of the larynx are that it predominantly aids in the production of speech. It also protects the lower respiratory tract from the food substances from preventing the food substances from entering into the respiratory tract. It acts as a passageway of air. It also aids in humidifying, filtering, and warming the air, and it initiates a cough reflex. Whenever any foreign body accidentally enters the trachea or the windpipe, the larynx initiates a cough reflex so that the foreign body is coughed away from the windpipe. The larynx continues below in the form of a windpipe or the trachea. This windpipe at the region of 5th thoracic vertebra divides into the right and the left main bronchus. The region where the trachea divides into the left and the right main bronchus is called as the carina. The trachea is composed of 3 layers from outside to inside, namely the hyaline cartilage, the smooth muscle, and the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. The patency of the trachea is maintained by 16 to 20 C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Trachea serves the following functions of maintaining the support and patency and mucociliary escalator. The trachea is lined by mucus on its inner side. It also consists of the cilia, which beat in only one particular direction. So whenever any foreign body enters the trachea, it gets trapped by the mucus and the cilia beat in one direction, acting like a conveyor belt, so that the foreign body is expelled out from the windpipe. Trachea also produces a cough reflex, and it helps in warming, humidifying, and filtering the inhaled air. The trachea divides into the right and the left bronchus. The right bronchus is wider, shorter, and more vertical than the left bronchus. And this is the reason why the foreign bodies get lodged more in the right bronchus than in the left, while the left bronchus is obviously narrower than the right. Here you can see the larynx, the trachea dividing into the right and the left main bronchus. The right bronchus again divides into three main branches, each one branch into each of the lobe of the right lung. The left main bronchus divides into two main branches, one branch to each lobe of the left lung. The bronchi are composed of almost the same architecture as that of the trachea and are lined with ciliated columnar epithelium. The segmental bronchi divide into bronchioles, which further divide and redivide into terminal bronchioles and the respiratory bronchioles. Each respiratory bronchiole is again divided into 2 to 11 alveolar ducts, each of which divides into alveolar sacs. The functions of the bronchi are that they control the air entering, they warm and humidify the air, they maintain the support and patency, and also remove the particulate matter by initiating a cough reflex. Alveoli are those structures in which the process of gas exchange occurs. There are about 150 million alveoli in each of the adult lung. As the airways progressively divide right from the bronchi to the alveoli, they become smaller and smaller, and also their walls gradually become very thin, that they will be around 1 cell thick layers. These distal respiratory passages are also supported by a network of elastic connective tissue. Here you can see the terminal bronchiole dividing into alveolar duct and then the alveolar sac. The pulmonary capillaries, they lie close to the alveoli, which are actually the sites of gaseous exchange. The functions of the alveoli is that they are the sites of external respiration. That is nothing but the exchange of gases that is happening at the alveoli. They also aid in the defense against the microorganisms, as they include the cells called like lymphocytes and plasma cells, which produce the antibodies. Alveolar macrophages are the cells that are present within the alveoli. They gobble onto the foreign substances or any particulate matter that is entering into the alveoli. They take them physically all the way up to the conducting bronchioles and initiate the mucociliary escalator, so that these foreign bodies will be thrown out. They'll be either coughed up or they'll be taken down by swallowing. There are two lungs lying on either side of the heart, and they are pinkish in color. Each of the lungs are divided into lobes by means of fissures. The right lung is divided into a superior lobe, a middle lobe, and an inferior lobe by means of two fissures, namely the horizontal fissure and the oblique fissure. The left lobe is divided into superior and the inferior lobe by means of this oblique fissure. The pleura are the closed sac of serous membrane into which each of the lung invaginates, as a result of which it forms two layers, the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura. The visceral pleura is that thin membrane that covers the outer surface of the lung, whereas the parietal pleura is that lies on the inner surface of the thoracic cavity. The space between the two layers of the pleura, that is the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura, is called the pleural cavity. This cavity contains a thin film of serous fluid produced by the epithelial cells, and this fluid aids in preventing the friction during the lung movements. The term respiration basically means the exchange of gases between the body cells and the outer environment. It again consists of two components, the pulmonary ventilation and the exchange of gases. Pulmonary ventilation simply means the movement of air into and out of the lungs. The gas exchange that takes place in two places, that is the alveoli and the tissues. In the alveoli, it is referred to as external respiration, and the exchange that is taking place in the tissue is referred to as internal respiration. Breathing supplies the oxygen to the alveoli and eliminates the carbon dioxide from the alveoli. There are two main muscles that are responsible for respiration, namely the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. But however, during stages of difficult or deep breathing, the accessory muscles of respiration comes to play. There are 11 pairs of intercostal muscles that occupy the space between the 12 pairs of ribs. These intercostal muscles are arranged into two layers, namely the external intercostal muscles and the internal intercostal muscles. The first rib is always fixed. So whenever the intercostal muscles contract, the rest of the ribs are pulled towards the first rib. As a result, this increases the diameter of the thoracic cavity. The peculiar shape and size of the ribs also aids in increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle which forms the floor of the thoracic cavity and also the roof of the abdominal cavity. The muscle fibers of this dome-shaped diaphragm fuse to form the central tendon. So when the diaphragm contracts, the central tendon is pulled downwards, increasing the size of the thoracic cavity and also increasing the pressure in the abdominal cavity. Inspiration. The process of inspiration is active as it requires energy for muscle contraction. During inspiration, the intercostal muscles contract, pulling the rib cage upward and outward, increasing the size of the thoracic cavity. The diaphragm also contracts, as a result of which the diameter of the thoracic cavity further increases, decreasing the intrapulmonary pressure. Due to this, the external air, which is of higher atmospheric pressure, flows into the thoracic cavity, which has lower intrapulmonary pressure. Expiration, on the other hand, is a passive process as it does not require energy. During expiration, the intercostal muscle relax, decreasing the size of the thoracic cavity. The diaphragm also relaxes, attaining its dome-shaped position and further decreasing the diameter of the thoracic cavity and increasing the intrapulmonary pressure. As a result, the air from the thoracic cavity is expelled out into the atmosphere. The lung volumes and capacities are very much important as they help in assessing the normal physiological function of the lungs and also important tool in diagnosing the various lung pathologies. On an average, an individual breathes for about 15 to 18 times per minute. The tidal volume is the amount of air that is passing in and out of the lung during normal quiet breathing. That means whenever we breathe normally, we breathe in almost around 500 ml of air. The inhaled oxygen passes through the nasal cavity and reaches the lung to just reach the alveoli, where it quickly passes the air-blood barrier to be diffused into the capillaries. Similarly, the carbon dioxide collected from all over the body reaches the capillaries and passes the air-blood barrier to reach the alveoli and to be expelled out to the atmosphere via the nose. External respiration. External respiration refers to the gaseous exchange that is occurring across the respiratory membrane in the region of the alveoli. The carbon dioxide in the venous blood, which is of high concentration, diffuses quickly into the alveoli. Similarly, the oxygen, which is of high concentration in the alveoli, diffuses through the membrane and reaches the capillary blood. Internal respiration refers to the gaseous exchange across the respiratory membrane that is occurring in the metabolizing tissues. Majority of the oxygen in the capillary blood is bound to the hemoglobin present in the RBC, forming oxyhemoglobin. The oxyhemoglobin dissociates to release oxygen, which will be diffused across into the respiring tissues. However, a part of the oxygen is also dissolved in the plasma, which just diffuses across the membrane. Oxygen is carried in the blood combined with hemoglobin as oxyhemoglobin, and similarly carbon dioxide is transported in the blood as carbaminohemoglobin. The respiratory center in the human beings is the medulla oblongata. Whenever there is any increase in the carbon dioxide or any decrease in the pH, the peripheral and the central chemoreceptor, they sense it and send nerve impulses back to the medulla oblongata, which send a nerve signals to trigger the contraction of the respiratory muscles, as a result of which the respiratory rate will either increase or decrease accordingly. These are some of the facts about respiratory system, but unfortunately, sir, I already told you all this. So thank you one and all for giving me this opportunity.
That was very nice.
Thank you, sir.
So I think you all got a very nice flavor from what Sja talked about of the level of complexity and simplicity of the lung. You got to see a very nice, beautifully fractal system by which there is a pattern that repeats and yet functions so smoothly and nicely. And I hope you got to see all the various possibilities. She only talked about health, but you can imagine at every level that she talked about, if something were to go wrong, what would happen? If there were to be swelling in the upper airway tract, you can start imagining people will feel very congested. If you go down further into the airways and the airways were to contract, the air would not flow. Resistance would be up. You would have something like asthma. You go further down, the alveoli do not exchange the gas. You would have difficulty breathing, your oxygen will go down. And you start thinking of all these things in the context of what is happening, COVID-19, and you start imagining the lungs are not able to transfer oxygen because the virus and the inflammation has filled up the lungs. It will be absolutely difficult for the patient to survive. So I think every part of what Sja talked about was so critical in terms of understanding what is going on around us today. I'll stop here briefly and see if there are questions or how people want to proceed.
Good evening, sir. Hello, good evening, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. So I have a question. So basically, in case of asthma, there are two kinds of asthma. One which we see in adults, and also in the children, which over the time disappears or it just vanishes when you become an adult. So what is the change? What is the difference between these two kind of asthma? What the change happens in the time that in adult stage is no longer prevalent?
So asthma actually is far more than two types if you start thinking about it. But one way of thinking about asthma is intrinsic and extrinsic. That's an old classification. In that system, people who react to an outside allergic substance and react are the ones who are extrinsic asthma. And they're those people, you can put them in a sterile room with no external contaminants coming in, and yet they will continue to have periodic bronchoconstriction. And you can think of them as intrinsic asthma. It's of course more complicated than that. The fundamental difference between these two types, and there are many others, is one is dominated by allergic inflammation, which is primarily an inflammatory problem. And the other seems to be more of a structural problem in the way the lungs, the airway epithelium, and the peribronchial smooth muscle seems to be functioning. Given enough time and chronicity, one type of asthma, which is extrinsic to start with early in life, can also start behaving like intrinsic asthma later on. But today we think of this actually not so much in intrinsic and extrinsic terms, which is an old way. Today we think of it more in terms of the fundamental pathogenetic mechanisms and the response to treatments. And there are so many of them now out there. But I'll kind of leave it here for the time being.
Another question is related to COVID. Maybe you can comment on it. So we are trying, even many clinicians are also seeing, they are giving a particular type of breathing exercise to the COVID patients. It's improving the way they respond to the treatment, or its positive effects on them. So what are your comments on
I couldn't hear part of that question. Can you repeat that?
the breathing exercise? Can it will be helpful
Oh,
for
yes. Well, it can't hurt. Let me put it like this. I think breathing exercises strengthen your, as if you look at what Shija was talking to you about, your diaphragm, your intercostal muscles, deep breathing, holding, they would inflate your lungs, open it up. There's something called atelectasis, where parts of your lungs collapse. So you would certainly have better stretch, better opening of your lungs, strengthening of your muscles, and your ability to tolerate. A dysfunction would be better than a person who has weak muscles. So perhaps in a borderline case, where one person goes into failure, somebody with a stronger, uh, better exercised respiratory system, more open, would perhaps turn the corner while the other one would not. So I would say that yes, it's a good idea to do breathing exercises. In fact, I don't think we should do it for COVID. We should do it for just regular health. And one of the best ways of exercising your lungs is any exercise, right? Your minute ventilation, the amount of air you take in every minute, interestingly goes up by almost 10 times when you start running. That's how much it increases. So yes, I think all exercise, but breathing exercise in particular is good for you.
Dr. Anurag, I wanted to follow it up with reports of hospitals, doctors advising the patients to stay prone and breathe.
Yes.
How does that happen?
Sure. So one of the things we are seeing in this disease is that the lungs show a lot of collapse. So if there is a part of the lung in which there is no air, but blood continues to flow, that blood will not pick up oxygen, but will reach the left side of the heart. That will lead to a drop in the oxygen levels in the blood that goes to the rest of your body. So now when you prone the person, what happens is the gravity now shifts. So the part that was open is now coming down, and the part that was closed, where atelectasis happened, is now going up. So the back is, because of gravity, things have accumulated. Now the back is up, the front is down. And blood flow following gravity will now increase to the front and diminish in the backside of your lungs. So suddenly the blood flow will basically start going to a different part of the lung, which is still open, and away from the part where the secretions have accumulated. And immediately the oxygen goes up a little bit. Normally we couple this with positive pressure breathing, in which the lungs open up also a little bit.
Thank you. I want to ask a question to Srija. Srija, very nice presentation, elaborate. This was one of the fewer times I found myself with the screen and not doing the background work. So what do you think, Srija, if we were to have a bad lung after COVID infection, which if the patient were to be given a choice, right lung or left lung to be infected with COVID, will it be equally damaging, or because you showed asymmetric the lung, you showed 3 lobes in right lung and 2 lobes in the left lung. Does it matter, and why are they made like this?
Sure. So I think the chances of infection are definitely more to one lung than the other. But I can't say specifically which one.
So one thing about COVID, bit different from lobar pneumonia, is it is usually bilateral. So subsequent reinfection or superinfection can be one-sided. But one of the things you look for on a CT to see it is COVID, it's affecting both sides of the lung. But hypothetically, for any pneumonia, the parts you would lose and not even feel them are the upper lobes, either left or right. Similarly, the lingula on the left side, the majority of gas exchange happens from the lower lobes of both lungs. And part of it is very obvious. Most of the blood flow goes to the lower lobes simply by gravity. Also, they're larger. So if you had to lose a lobe, lose the upper lobe, the lung will just expand. You basically won't even make out the difference. If you lose even a single lobe, lower lobe, you will start feeling the difference. But in theory, you could remove the entire left lung, or even the right for that matter. And when you're at rest, the other lung will be able to manage. is as you start exercising, the things will be important, but left lung clearly has less ventilation capacity than the right lung. It's about 60-40.
Would you know what is the status of lung transplants in India and versus world? And is it really a significant advancement in medical science?
So lung transplant is still unfortunately very poorly done in India. There have been a few people who have done a few isolated cases, but even AIIMS Delhi does not routinely do lung transplant. I think they've tried once. PGI Chandigarh, I think, is also about to try one or has done one in the past. But fundamentally, there is neither a good supply of donor lungs. So unfortunately, most Indians prefer to be cremated with their body parts as opposed to donate them. And number two, the amount of care required. It's not about the technology. The technology is all here. The surgeons are also good enough. It's about the amount of care required in the post-op management of a lung transplant patient that is possibly lacking at times.
Parul, you can take it forward. There are some yoga scholars, other students, and someone can also look up the Facebook questions. I do not have my phone with me. I'm sorry. Please take it forward.
Okay, sir. So is there any question? Okay, Kalyan asked.
Ma'am, whenever a person having the respiratory disorders, any kind of respiratory disorder, when they are going to the doctor is first they are suggesting that you have to do some breathing exercise. Along with that, like they are suggesting you have to take the steam. So can you please elaborate how steam will help? Means what is the mechanism, how steam will help to dilate the lungs or respiratory disorders?
I think he's asking Shrija.
So
Yes.
as of my knowledge, steam doesn't dilate the lungs. The steam inhalation usually roots away the bacteria and the microorganisms which are there in your upper respiratory tract. So it has nothing to do with the lung, especially expansion of the lung. And why does the doctor ask you to do breathing exercises is that according to your spirometry readings, that is the lung volume and lung capacity readings, if the doctor can advise you to perform some, do some exercises so that it will increase your lung capacities and the volumes. So Anurag sir, please correct me.
No, I mean, breathing exercise can slightly improve your forced vital capacity. There is some data for that, not much, but slightly. Steam is of course complicated. I mean, I don't necessarily know there is a right answer to that. It certainly is good for people with periodic congestion, drains a lot. Jalniti is excellent as well. I mean, I can think of so many people who had severe sinus disease, started doing regular Jalniti and steam, and then did very, very well without medication. So yes, for people with disease, it's certainly good. I'm not sure how good it is preventing disease. I suppose it should be good, but I don't think there is a very great answer from our side.
Sir, one more.
Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. One more question, like those are having asthma, basically in definition of asthma, it is saying that it is a reversible airway obstruction.
Yes.
I think this is the definition of
Yes.
asthma, but most of the people are using the inhaler.
So the meaning of the word reversible, the meaning of the word reversible is reversible with inhalers.
Yeah, doctors are suggesting that inhalers, but as a yoga scholar, I have saw many cases. We can recover them, or we can give them improve their breath holding time by doing the Jalniti and Baman Dhauti. It is a vomiting type of kriya in yoga, so we can reverse them, or we can make them feel better after doing this. What do you suggest, sir?
I'm open to anything with evidence. I'll add two things though. In asthma in particular, there was always a high, you always used to see people die of asthma when early in the 1960s and 70s. If you went to emergency rooms, in the 70s, they were full of people with asthma. Ever since inhaled steroids came, deaths because of asthma have become rare. And there is very quick reversal of obstruction. So while I believe that perhaps there is a way using all the other principles to prevent asthma or to reduce the requirement, I would always prefer going with numbers. So one should measure the resistance of the airways, see the resistance has come down. If the resistance has not come down, quickly move to inhalers and always use inhaled steroids. Never delay introduction of inhaled steroids in patients with asthma, thinking that steroids are bad. It's a very small dose. Do not go, in my opinion, for any therapy for a long time that would lead to delay in the introduction of inhaled steroids. There are tremendous advantages in terms of prevention of severe exacerbations and death. With that exception, I think all the other ideas are absolutely fine.
Thank you, sir.
I need to apologize and move on to something else, if
Sure.
that's okay with you, Akshay, because somebody is calling me again and again for another meeting.
Thank you for making it happen and coming and joining us all. I know you are a busy person, and we also wish you good luck for what you're doing. In one line or in two lines, in as a concluding statement, maybe you can inspire the viewers to tell us what you are actually doing in your own research. Just in very brief, it will be difficult to say it, but since you are just about to leave.
My research has basically three directions. One direction is on lung health, respiratory health in general. The second direction is in digital health, where we are looking at how we can use digital technologies to increase the spread of healthcare services across the nation. And the last is as a biologist. We are trying to look at how mitochondria, organelles that generate energy, are intricately tied on one end to pollution and lifestyle, and on the other end to respiratory health. So this is roughly what we do. We discovered a long time ago that targeting the mitochondria is a good way of maintaining overall respiratory health.
Great.
And with that, thank you all so much.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure being here.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
We'll connect again.
And very well done, Srijan. And thank you so much, Akshay. Bye.
Arul, you can carry on.
Yes. Is there any question for Shrija? So Shrija, thank you for the nice presentation, for the understanding, basic understanding of the anatomy and
Ask one
physiology.
question, Parul, if you allow, or you are closing down. Can I ask a question to her?
Sure, sir.
Srija, I want to know, you showed that the oxygen or the gaseous exchange takes place at alveoli with the capillaries, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you breathe in and you showed inspiration, expiration, and this thing boils down to capillary interface within the alveoli, correct?
Sir, there will be diffusion of gas between the oxygen and the capillary network, right? Sir?
Right. So this must be happening in microseconds, because we are breathing in and breathing out, breathing in and breathing
Yes,
out.
sir. The process of inspiration itself takes 2 seconds. So the gaseous exchange will take very less.
So gaseous exchange, that physiological phenomena is so fast, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So what happens when the one begins to hold the breath, like it happens in yogic exercises? There is something called kumbhak. You hold the breath and you hold as long as it allows, and sometimes it makes you are required to hold the breath for a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4 or 2, 4, 8, or different ratios are recommended in Hatha Yoga, Pradipika, if I'm not wrong. But regardless of the ratios, does holding breath in any way, according to you, alter the gaseous exchange? Does it empower it? Does it impair it? Or it doesn't matter?
Sir, even when we are holding the respiration, the gaseous exchange will continue to occur. The difference might occur in the amounts of carbon dioxide that gets stored. Like the amount of carbon dioxide might be more in the alveoli. But the gaseous exchange will continue to occur irrespective of whether we are holding a breath or not.
Okay, thank you. Parul, I'm done with my question. You can take it whatever way you want.
Is there any question? One person was about to ask, but he didn't post any. So is there any question from any student? Okay, thank you, Srija, for wonderful presentation.